The United States wants war with China, and increasingly, and under the radar, no one is really covering this. The United States, under the Joe Biden administration, is taking drastic, dangerous measures that could lead to a catastrophic war with China. The latest development is that the United States military is sending special forces to an island just kilometers away from the mainland of China. Yes, this is a de facto occupation of China, the beginning of what could be, again, a catastrophic war. And so the news was released. Okay, here's the news. This was from Taiwan Defense Update. U.S. Army Special Forces, the Green Berets, are going to be stationed with the Republic of China's Army 101st Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion on a long-term basis on Kinmen and Matsu Islands. These are Chinese islands. Okay, these are de facto governed by the so-called Taiwan authorities, but this is a dangerous escalation because of the location. So that was the report. I'm just going to show you a map, and then there's a story, a report on this from Newsweek, and there wasn't really any indication and coverage of this from the rest of the Western mainstream media. But here's a map to give you a perspective of how dangerous this is. So this is mainland China. This is Fujian province here. And if we zoom in, there's Kinmen. So look how close that is. Kinmen, I'm going to zoom in here. We're talking about the U.S. military essentially stationing its forces, the Green Berets in this case, right on China's coast. So Newsweek did have a report on this, and we can see it here. U.S. Army Special Forces train Taiwan troops near China's coast. Specialists from, let's get rid of Jens Stoltenberg's face there. Specialists from the U.S. Army are training Taiwanese soldiers in what is described as a permanent arrangement rather than on a rotational basis, including on an island just 6 miles from the Chinese coast, according to Taiwan's United Daily News, which reported that the training regimens were being planned and supervised by the 1st Special Forces Group, an airborne unit, under the provisions of last year's NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, signed into law in December 2022. China claims Taiwan as its own, but the Communist Party in Beijing has never ruled the island since seizing power in 1949. Taipei rejects the sovereignty claims for decades and has relied on the United States for weapons and training, as well as international support, despite Washington's decision to break off formal relations in 1979. U.S. service members are training Taiwan's armed forces. That U.S. service members were training Taiwan's armed forces became a years-long open secret that was not officially acknowledged until 2021, when President Tsai Ing-wen said a few American instructors were on the island for occasional training programs. The National Defense Authorization Act for 2023, however, opened the door to more robust cooperation between the two security partners. And they're not security partners because this is a vassal government, the DPP. They are vassals. They are puppets of the United States. They are not independent. They are not a political entity that could be called a nation. So they're not security partners, because that can only happen between nations with militaries and sovereignty recognized by the United Nations. So they're not that. But that's how, of course, the mainstream media constantly portrays Taiwan. Taiwan's defense ministry didn't comment on the report, but said all foreign military exchanges are conducted on an annual plan. U.S. Defense Department spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Martin Meaners had no comment on specific training, but said, quote, "I would highlight that our support for and defense relationship with Taiwan remains aligned against the current threat posed by the People's Republic of China." So again, this is a major provocation. What is the United States military saying here? That it's okay. Do you see how close this is? This is where Kinmen Islands is. This is how close it is. This is mainland China right here. So we are witnessing a major escalation. This is where the United States has begun to station its troops that could very well, and I believe this is all about giving a kind of first tripwire, right? A tripwire to spark a war with China, because these Green Beret forces are not going to be able to do very much against the People's Liberation Army. We have to be clear about that. But they will cause a problem for the People's Liberation Army if they have to essentially move into Taiwan, first having to take care of this initial threat. That means this is a tripwire. This is a way to trip China into a war, which has been the whole purpose of militarizing Taiwan in the first place. So, the United Daily News said that Army Green Berets of the 1st Special Forces Group are this year permanently stationed at 2 bases of the 101st Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion, a Taiwanese Army operations force. The instructors were sent to Penghu, closer to Taiwan proper, but also to Kinmen, a group of islands visible from the port city of Xiamen in eastern China on the Chinese side of the Taiwan Strait. The Chinese side of the Taiwan Strait, it's all China. All right, let's be clear here. According to international law, according to the One China policy of the United States, according to most nations in the world, 90% plus of them. But the 1st Battalion of the Pacific-oriented 1st Special Forces Group is forward deployed on the Japanese island of Okinawa. The rest are stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington State. According to the report, American service members were also present at a military base in Toyan in northern Taiwan to provide specialist training on drone equipment that Taipei hopes to procure for its Airborne Special Service Company, an elite special force unit roughly analogous to the Army's Delta Force. The U.S. has had no official military footprint in Taiwan for over 4 decades. Until recently, the presence of a permanent presence of American forces on the island was considered a possible trigger of a cross-strait shooting war. On paper, U.S.-Taiwan military exchanges, which have been indirectly acknowledged in the past, are managed by the American Institute in Taiwan, the de facto U.S. Embassy in Taipei. Our commitment to Taiwan is rock solid and contributes to the maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and the region. Absolutely garbage. But that's a report that demonstrates, I showed you the map, exactly how far the United States will go. This is something I'm going to continue to say on this channel. I've said continuously on this channel. The United States wants war with China, and war is coming. Vladimir Putin just gave an interview with Tucker Carlson where he basically outlined the history of U.S. provocations against Russia. That history, if we replaced Russia with China, would be very similar, of course, with some key differences. The United States started its encirclement campaign against China roughly around the same time it started its encirclement campaign against Russia. It really increased. It really jumped off the ground right after the admission of Estonia, Latvia, I believe it was Lithuania, those 3 countries into NATO. And then the encirclement campaign became absolutely on steroids. NATO began to do huge training drills all across Eastern Europe in order to provoke Russia. And of course, Ukraine was the tripwire that led to now this prolonged proxy war that very well could still lead to a hot war. Even Vladimir Putin himself said this could lead to a hot war if the United States wants to take it there. China, it is the same. The pivot to Asia that Hillary Clinton, the neocons, Barack Obama put into full force during the end of the first half of the first term of the Biden administration. When that was implemented, when that was enacted, we saw military resources skyrocket, expansion skyrocket in the Asia Pacific, in the Philippines, in Japan, in South Korea. We can go on and on and on. All across the Asia Pacific, the U.S. was moving its carrier groups, moving its Navy, its Army. It's sending massive amounts of troops, over 300,000, to the Asia Pacific. John Pilger, rest in power to him, has a great documentary about this, The Coming War on China, in 2016 that shows the massive number, hundreds of military bases encircling China. And now that campaign is being injected with steroids by the Biden administration, which has sent Green Beret forces to the island of Kinmen in order to provoke China, in order to be the tripwire into a broader war over Taiwan. That is the reality here. This is absolutely suicidal. This is something that the United States still has in the works, even when our eyes are glued to the horrors in Gaza, are glued to the ongoing war of attrition in Ukraine. When we have the United States sending forces right up on the doorstep of a country that not only is nuclear capable, but also is the most important economy in the world, you better believe it's because the United States has a huge interest. And when I say the United States, I mean the ruling circle. I mean those neocons that do the bidding of the ruling circle, that do the bidding of these elites. They have a huge interest in taking out China, or believing, or at least pursuing that possibility. I don't believe they think they can do so. I do have my suspicions about U.S. capabilities, and also many of these think tanks, as I have said here on this program and shown, whether it's the Center for Strategic International Studies, whether it's the Rand Corporation, many of these think tanks, these war planners, don't believe that China is an easy foe to fight. They always say we're going to win, we're going to beat them, but they always put in their reports that waging a war against China would lead to massive amounts of destruction that the United States would suffer gravely from. Taiwan would suffer gravely from. And what happens? So we've seen in this war of attrition that there was a huge miscalculation. Putin said it to Tucker Carlson. This was a massive miscalculation. They should have been able to predict this. Sure, Vladimir Putin was being really nice. It's not about predictions. It's not about what is correct to the warmongers, to those who only see profits and expansionism for profits as their ultimate aim. No, intelligence and what's right and what will be the correct decision, what will be good for self preservation, that doesn't matter. That's not the biggest fish for these warmongers to fry. They want to fry the world so they can essentially eat. They can essentially eat it. They want to devour the Chinese market. They do not want China to be independent, just like they don't want Russia to be independent. They don't want to see huge sovereign countries with strong, centralized, state led economic systems assert themselves in the world for the fear that their rationality, their ability to plan ahead, their ability to be governed by principles, whether you agree with those principles or not. I am of the position that China and Russia overall, in the main, are taking the world into a better place than where it was before they were big powers. But regardless of whether you agree with it or not, that is not the point. The point is that the United States and the collective West have as their aim as diminishing, balkanizing, destroying, dividing, and ultimately conquering these two major powers. China, in particular, as Putin said on Tucker Carlson's interview, China in particular is the biggest and gravest threat to the United States' hegemony. So, all that is to say is that there's just so many reasons why this is going on, but it comes part of a larger campaign of militarization, one that no one really has been paying attention to since the United States became mired in quagmire after quagmire in the Middle East, in Ukraine, that the Asia Pacific and China has kind of taken a back seat. But the United States has been trying to provoke conflict with China, whether it's Taiwan or the Philippines. There have been confrontations between China and the Philippines, mainly because of the United States' backing of the government in the Philippines, which has basically traded away any semblance of sovereignty to become a full protectorate of the United States post Rodrigo Duterte's rule, which saw a little bit more balance. Now we see a complete vassal of the United States willing to do its bidding. You even have India sending ridiculously submarines into the Pacific, into the Indian Ocean in order to uh, uh, provoke China, right? Like this is going on and on and on. And it's all because the United States um, is not done. It's not done with China. It wants to wage war on China. It wants China to um, submit. That's what it ultimately wants. And so this latest development with regard to Taiwan, with regard to Kinmen and Matsu, these islands that are part of this long-standing one China, two systems policy that China has attempted um, to facilitate with regard to Taiwan is a major escalation and one that we're not going to hear about because it's much easier to look at Biden's incompetence, what's happening in the United States, the political chaos here. Much easier, especially when you have Vladimir Putin going on Tucker Carlson and giving a master class. All of that is easier to look at because it's everywhere. But these stories go under the radar, similar to what was happening to Russia before the special military operation. We only started to hear about, ooh, Russia is maybe going to invade Ukraine late in 2021 because we were not being informed by the Western mainstream media of a years long process of NATO expansion along Russia's border. And so when the Western mainstream media started reporting on it, what happened? Many people said, wow, Russia's bad. Russia is aggressive. Russia is trying to unilaterally wage war. And the United States is here to protect us. That is what we were led to believe. Now, many people fell for it, especially in the fog of war when there was wall to wall coverage against Russia. There was very ill coverage and very bad coverage of Russia during this time, even as Putin was attempting to negotiate with the United States and with NATO over the issue of Ukraine. What did we hear? We heard how bad Russia was, how Russia was so unreasonable with its security demands. And within 24 or 48 hours, those security guarantees were completely ignored and rejected. So, this is a scenario that very well could happen with China. China has over and over and over again asserted that the one China principle is the ultimate policy governing China and its relations with Taiwan province. The United States has this policy set in its own laws. It is a part of the books of how the United States relates to China. It is part of the normalization process. The United States, however, has continuously violated this with arms sales in the tens of billions, with continuous diplomatic wrangling, support of opposition movements, color revolutions, the DPP. Now there's talk of Biden eventually sending a bipartisan once he can get his head out of his you know what, once the quagmires in Ukraine and the Middle East somewhat diffuse, he will be sending a bipartisan delegation to Taiwan in order to provoke China even further. And that's why China continues its constant and regular military drills. Oh, well, on its own coast, in its own oceans, in its own waters, in its own seas. That is what it means to be a sovereign country. The United States sending its aircraft carriers, its submarines, its military personnel, its armaments, its navy, etc., thousands of miles away is not about sovereignty. It's not freedom of navigation and all of this nonsense. It is straight up provocation. When I was in Vietnam in October, we went to the coast of Vietnam and we looked out to the South China Sea. And what did we see? We saw US naval carriers. That's what we saw. We could see them from the coast of Vietnam. Did Vietnam ask them to be there? No. Did any other country ask them to be there? No. The United States says it's their right to be there and do something about it and suffer consequences. That's how the United States operates, as a bully. And right now, as a pathetic bully at that. Because while the United States wants war, and while its actions certainly could be a tripwire to a war with China, the United States is not in a position to fight such a war. If Russia has been able to do what it has done to the United States and to NATO, what do you think China can do? China's economy is far more advanced than Russia's, and Russia's economy has benefited from the special military operation. If there was an attempt to decouple from China, China has shown every bit of capacity and capabilities to withstand these attempts at sanctions. China has sanctions against it. China has been targeted with export bans and sanctions on high tech corporations. There's a blacklist of high tech corporations. It has been isolated to a certain degree from the US market in many key areas. This has hurt the US market more than China. The trade war on China has hurt farmers in the United States, has hurt distributors in the United States. It has hurt the agricultural sector in the United States. It hasn't really hurt China at all. And so the point here is that this war is coming. There is a war coming against China. Now, people have to be very careful in the United States and in the collective West what they wish for. They have to be very careful about who they support here. When Tucker Carlson interviewed Vladimir Putin, he tried to drive a wedge between China and Russia. He tried to say Russia is strong and feared. Why is that? And China is strong but not feared by the United States, ignoring developments like this, these dangerous developments where you have Green Berets literally sitting on China's coast, just 6 miles away from the mainland, ignoring the fact that there's been a decade plus long campaign of military encirclement of China, ignoring all of this, ignoring the sanctions on China. Now, where we have to be careful is, who do we trust? Who do we base our conclusions off of? Do we base it off of the US, European, in many instances, political establishment, which sees China as an adversary? Or do we base it on the opinions of the vast majority of the world, including the multipolar world, not just Russia, but the vast majority of countries which see China as a cooperative partner, a mutual partner, a partner in development, and a partner in peace in many instances? Go ask the the cargo ships, those ships trying to get through the Red Sea from the collective West, from the United States, who are aiding Israel's onslaught in Gaza. Ask them how they feel about China being able to go through the Red Sea without any trouble, because Yemen sees China not as an adversary, but a friend, and one that isn't allowing Israel to do what it is doing, that it's actually the United States and its European partners. You have the point where British cargo ships are trying to impersonate Chinese vessels just to get through the Red Sea. It's an absolutely pathetic phenomenon. But what it demonstrates is that China's prestige is rising around the world. Its stature is rising around the world. And if we think that Russia has been absolutely victorious in its ability to defend itself and strengthen itself from a proxy war led by the United States, then we should believe that China will not only be able to do something very similar, but perhaps the final nail in the coffin for the US empire will be China. And this war that the United States empire is trying to wage, is trying to essentially lay the tripwire for, is one of suicide. And we have to be the ones to decide whether we want to go that path or not. I, for one, am not for that path. I do not want to see anyone else go down that path, especially the people. I do not want to see anyone have to die or have to suffer, have to become even more impoverished because the United States wants a suicidal war with China. That is not what I want to see. I will be in China in April of 2024, once again, trying to build that people-to-people solidarity that we have seen with many folks with regard to Russia. And I will be reporting out from there and getting people's opinions and understanding of this dangerous escalation, but of course, the entire story behind it.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.